Show, the post-game show. Joining us, JD. It's been a couple weeks since we've chatted. And full disclosure, it is tough keeping up with all these signings, everything that's coming down in the CFL. We got Doncic getting traded. We got hockey players getting traded. But CFL, let's focus in. Today, let's start with our Riders. And Tavon Campbell. Totally forgot about that name. Local guy. Riders pick him up. 6 foot, 200, returns to Saski. What do you think about this one? What do you know about this one? Did he play ball? Did he ball last year?
He was not in the NFL last year, but that's what got my spidey senses tingling is, did he want to continue playing football because he earned over $3 million USD, it should be said, in the NFL? And that question has now been answered. And I felt like if he did want to continue to play, that it could be coming back to the Riders. A massive move considering he's Canadian and he can play on the field side. I talked to some people around the CFL. He could potentially play on that boundary side. Heck, he played corner in the NFL. So he's like an American coming back up here and playing in the Canadian Football League. I'll be really intrigued to see where Corey Mace goes with this, but it gives them even more ratio flexibility than they already had signing this high-end Canadian.
Yeah, the Canadian factor. That's where I was like, okay, well, this looks like a little bit of a steal or some found money. Does he have, and do we know, does he have any connection with the coaching staff, anybody on the staff?
You'd have to go back. I mean, the one that I would think of would be Jeremy O'Day because he's just been there for so long. And it was the Riders that drafted him while Chris Jones was there and really developed him and brought him along. I remember him at the CFL Combine running the 40-yard dash in the 4.3 second range. That's like elite speed. But people still had concerns about his ability to cover and could he be an every down player at cornerback? Well, he's erased all those. I've had some talent evaluators tell me that they've even made them look stupid in terms of their evaluations by going down to the NFL, starting down there, as you saw on that beautiful B-roll on the live stream, had an interception touchdown down there, like no joke, played legitimate snaps in the NFL. So I think he can do it in the CFL. And the fact that he's Canadian is a major bonus. Great move from Jeremy O'Day and Corey Mace.
Like you said, we don't know, or maybe he was playing, some equivalent to senior men's football or staying in shape, whatever. But like you said, it sounds like he still wants to play football, which there could be that fire there, which he, like you said, you kind of threw out the money that he was making down south, where he's just like, listen, I just want a ball, love Saski, and I want to win, right? That could be the play here.
Indeed, and it's hard to turn down, playing for well into the six figures. I don't have the exact amount on him, but a guy like this is going to command that kind of money. I would think, and this is based on people telling me from guesswork around the league, that it's going to be over $150,000 per year on that contract that he signed. I don't usually like throwing out numbers, but I mean, for him, that's not chump change either. Yeah, you made over $3 million in the NFL, but there's some tax money that's going to come away from that. And if you still want to play football, and he's in prime shape, this guy always keeps himself in high-end shape, then why not come and do it for the Riders and on that defense with Corey Mace?
Yeah, 31 years old. How about Rose? Right? There's another guy, maybe some will go, hey, he's in his 30s and all that. What do you think about that signing late last week?
Well, there were a handful of teams in the mix, so that tells you all you need to know. When you have about half of the league chasing you, then there's definite interest. Mike Rose was a disruptor in Calgary, and I think he just kind of got caught up in this change for the sake of change that Dave Dickinson is going through. Yes, he was scheduled to make around $200,000 on that contract with the Stampeders. Before he was released, he was doing off-season roster bonus, but the guy is still an elite level player on the interior. That's a major upgrade, I think, for the Riders to get Mike Rose in there. And it's about connections, Barney. So often in life, especially in the Canadian Football League with how small it is, Corey Mace was his defensive line coach for several seasons in Calgary. So it made a lot of sense that Mike Rose comes in there. And I think that's where Riders fans need to look for potential next moves are connections. What connections are there? Lines you can draw with dots to connect them for the moves that the Riders could potentially make coming up as the window goes along and into free agency when the moves can be made official?
Yeah, the Mace thing again, right? Like bringing a guy in like that, and probably breath of fresh air for him as well. Sasky not too far away. He'd be familiar. Yeah, I like it. What is he, 32? I think he's 32 years old. Yeah.
In that range, yep.
Then it just came down, I don't know, minutes ago, and within the last hour, Wayne Ruby Jr., Riders signing 3-time OAC Receiver of the Year, Wayne Ruby Jr. Decent career in the Ohio Athletic Conference, which I didn't even know was a conference. 6'1", 6'1", 190. Really good numbers, solid. Plays his career there. Look at Curtis, man. You're quick on the ball.
He's all over
the stream. If you're watching the stream, there is Mr. Ruby Jr. Just anything about this guy, Jester? Just kind of what came down in the release.
You know what sticks out to me with these offseason signings are, can these guys come in and translate to the Canadian Football League game, right? Mm-hmm. We saw the Riders do it with a number of rookies last season. Probably the best American rookie receiver last year, off the top of my head, was Dante Myers. Had a great season, but then that was slowed down with the injury that he sustained. I believe it was an upper body injury. So when I think of these types of signings, that's what I think of. But, interesting that you bring up receiver, because these are Americans that are coming in their first year. And I've heard that at least through this communication window, the Riders have checked in on a receiver that has a connection to Trevor Harris. That would be a guy by the name of Eugene Lewis. The two spent time together in Montreal. 2022 was Lewis's best year in the Canadian Football League, Barney. He was named the East Division Most Outstanding Player, had over 1,300 yards, I believe 10 touchdowns that season, and the trigger man was Trevor Harris. If the price is right, I think perhaps there's a deal to be made. And I've also had people around the league say to me this: who was the guy that essentially ended the Riders season in Winnipeg as a pass catcher? Kenny Lawler. So I'm not saying that they're going to spend what Kenny Lawler wants, and I've heard that's about $250,000, $250,000. But if you take Kenny Lawler away from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in a year where Winnipeg's hosting the Grey Cup and he's on your team, I've had rival coaches and personnel people tell me that they believe the Riders would put themselves as the favorites, at least on paper. You got to go out and prove it, to win the West Division. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do it. I'm just giving you some sort of backroom, behind-the-scenes talk about what people feel, the Riders could do to put themselves on top. But it's not necessarily about spending the money either, because in Corey Mace's first year, especially with Jeremy O'Day, the general manager, Kyle Carson, the assistant general manager, Paul Jones, the other assistant general manager, they have shown that they can bring in talent to Corey Mace's staff and that it can be developed and actually be productive on the field in their first years. So I'm saying that's an idea that's floating around, and I'm sure it's going to get Riders fans excited, but it makes a lot of sense. There are multiple teams in on Kenny Lawler. I've not specifically heard the Riders, so it's just an idea for now. But I do think that the Riders at least checked in on Geno Lewis.
Okay. You talked about price tag for Lewis. First question is, what do you think the ceiling should be or would be for the Riders on him? Secondly, between Lawler and Lewis, in your mind, which would be the better fit? Is it the Harris tie-in with Lewis? What do you think there? Kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, I got you. So I'll try to answer the first part first. But in terms of the price tag, we're not privy to the Saskatchewan Roughriders cap numbers, and those are always floating, and you don't really need to be under the cap until at least the end of the season. You do have to manage it. So, I do think if Geno Lewis is going to come down substantially from the $320,000 that he made in 2024, the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, that potentially the Riders could be in the mix there, but he's going to have to come down, when I say substantially, I'm talking about like, even if it came down to 250 in
Okay.
Geno Lewis's mind, that's $70,000, right? Like that's a big chunk of change to drop. I don't necessarily think the Riders could get in the mix there if it was 250. But if it's lower and Geno Lewis wants to play with Trevor Harris and let's say doesn't want to go back to Edmonton or doesn't necessarily like the feel of going to Calgary, even though he knows Vernon Adams Jr., then it would make some sense, right? You're going to a legit contender on a team that's on the rise. So I think in terms of the connection with Trevor Harris, that could help something like that potentially get across the goal line because they do have that relationship that's been proven on the field. And Geno Lewis is going to sit around and think, well, okay, what if I go to Saskatchewan for, let's say, even 1 year, have another great season, set myself up in free agency to potentially have even more leverage a year from now? Because it seems like, and I've had some people tell me this, that general managers have been up front saying, hey, we got to kind of take this receiver market back down.
Yeah, I don't know if I got any relationships that would be worth $70,000 in my life.
Or more.
Yeah. What would Lawler fetch?
Lawler's looking for around $250,000. He made $285,000 last year with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And, there was a sense that perhaps in a year where Winnipeg's hosting the Grey Cup, that maybe he would take a little less to stay there. But I think he's going to have to come down substantially to potentially stay with the Blue Bombers. There's a bunch of teams in the mix there for Kenny Lawler who really believe that he's a guy that can be a game changer and is the scariest target available on the market.
Mace said, I think it was last week with Dave, that not everyone's going to be signed. That usually doesn't happen in any team sports. What have we seen, or what's caught your eye as far as guys exiting so far? I think it was Deontay Williams, Amari Henderson. Anybody else coming down the pipe that you can see?
Those two made sense to me even more now with the Tavon Campbell signing.
Yeah.
And you couple that with the fact that last year, I look at a guy like DeMarcus Fields, okay, playing that strong side halfback position, arguably one of the most difficult positions, I think underrated in terms of how hard it is to play on the Canadian Football League field. As a rookie, Corey Mace was able to coach him up, and he looked really good by the end of the season. And even early in the season, he was showing the ability to play at that level. So I want Riders fans to understand it's not always about going out there and spending the money either. Look in-house. So look at the guys that were on the practice roster last year that developed under Mace, that had a year. DeMarcus Fields didn't even have a year. He essentially had a training camp before he started there in terms of options for where the Riders could go to fill some of what people on the outside might feel like are holes. But if you look at this roster, even right now, Barney, you can see that it's upgraded, as you mentioned, just with Mike Rose and Tavon Campbell. And I think the Riders are going to be patient at this point in time and look for some bargains, because sort of the hype of free agency, I would say, has already happened. Like, free agency doesn't happen the second Tuesday in February anymore. It's the first Sunday in February.
Okay, the bargain thing I like, and maybe that's just the frugal part of me. The once the Tavon the Campbell thing came down, I'm like, okay, well, a lot of this is making sense now. Okay, fill in the blank. You think the Riders are still going to do what?
I think they're still going to look for, and I don't necessarily like this word, Dave Thomas is going to laugh, but find some depth for the Canadian offensive line. Depending how you look at it, and him and I were talking about this, that perhaps you could have Logan Ferland in there as your center with Travion Tate as your left tackle, Jamarcus Hardrick as your right tackle, Jacob Brammer at right guard, and Noah Zura at left guard. So that could be a starting construction for you, but Jeremy O'Day likes racial flexibility. And I think you can be patient right now, especially like, let's say with the center market, because Peter Godber is still out there, hasn't agreed to terms with another team. And he's a guy that's done so much community work there in Saskatchewan that, I think there could be a way to bridge that gap. So that's one area that I'm looking at, is the offensive line, because you can never have too many Canadians. And you and Rider Nation knows that there were so many injuries along the offensive line. So that's one area I would look for them to find some value and sign.
Wow, talk about making noise. Edmonton Elks. Like, did Larry Thompson just give Ed Hervey the company card and say go nuts? Like he's going to Costco or what?
It seems that way, but I've been breaking it down with some people. So let's look at this, for instance. Okay, McLeod Bethel Thompson made probably over $500,000 last year with playtime incentives and some bonus incentives in his contract. So the Elks now essentially have Trey Ford and Cody Fajardo for McLeod Bethel Thompson's money. So that's not necessarily a savings, but it kind of is in a way. If Geno Lewis isn't coming back with that $320,000, that opened up some space. They re-signed Niles Morgan, who tied for the CFL lead in tackles. They kind of technically re-signed Brett Boyko, probably for a little less because the Elks released him and then they wanted to assess the tackle market and came back to him. They definitely spent some money on Tyrell Ford in and around $230,000. Definitely spent some money on Robbie Smith to get him in there. He's well north of $230,000. And some of the other guys that they did pick up, but it wasn't like crazy money for some of the other guys. Like, I'll give you an example. Jake Ceresna took less to go back to Edmonton than what was on the table from Toronto. I heard he had about $240,000 on the table from the Argos, and he went and signed with the Elks for $225,000. So there was some value there that the Elks got because Ceresna wanted to come back to Edmonton. I believe he has a partner that's in the city too, so that makes some sense. But it wasn't like they sort of blew up the salary cap in a sense. Mm-hmm. But that brings me to my next point, Barney, because I've talked to a bunch of people around the league about this. They said, who cares if you go over the salary cap? It's like a luxury tax. And if you win and you have bums in seats and you have interest in your team and, heaven forbid, win a Grey Cup, that is going to bring in well above the revenue that you would need to pay that luxury tax and create a lot of interest for your team. So if Larry Thompson's sitting there, he's saying, essentially, I'm not saying that he's exactly saying this, but, go nuts. Just don't go too crazy. Sort of let me know where you're at from the cap perspective. But I think it's fairly reasonable what they've done when you do break it down.
Yeah, I am a firm believer. I like that salary cap, schmallery cap, win. That'll kind of clear everything up, and like the luxury taxing as well. I am curious on what the Elks' next move is. So what you're kind of saying though is we need to find a way to get, if they are attached, Geno Lewis's partner or Kenny Lawler's partner in Regina. There's got to be some sort of attachment here where he can take $20,000 less is what we need. Are you surprised by any team yet, whether it is the Elks, or are you surprised by maybe a team that's not doing as much as you thought they would?
Not yet, because I still think it's early, and I think some teams are waiting this out to hope the market cools off a little bit. I was surprised that the Elks went so fast, so furious on that first day. By my count, they added 8 starters, 5 of them Canadian. You got to start 7 Canadians. So they really turned that roster over. But I will say, surprised by one thing, and it has nothing to do with him essentially, but I thought Wynton McManus would get to the window. And he did push the market up for linebackers. He still remains the highest paid linebacker in the Canadian Football League, well over $200,000. But I thought he would get to the window, and a lot of people were frothing at the mouth just to have the chance to talk to him because they think he's that much of a game changer. So I don't want to say that was necessarily surprising. It's just something that I thought would happen based on the timing and talking to people around the league. But he clearly wanted to stay in Toronto.
Are you surprised that we don't have an OC in Winnipeg?
No, because Michael Sherry doesn't care. He just does things, on his own timeline. And the latest I've heard on that is that Mike Miller, I asked Ryan Dinwiddie this directly, had been requested to be interviewed by the Blue Bombers. He granted that request. And it almost kind of seemed like, by the way Dinwiddie was talking, that Miller was going to be gone. And some other people told me that former CFL quarterback Drew Tate might be really ready to step up and take Miller's role in Toronto as the quarterback coach. So it hasn't come to fruition yet. I'm sure there's some other names that Mike O'Shea is keeping close to his vest, but the name that I've heard most is Mike Miller. The other one is Jarius Jackson, but then some people tell you he might not fit in with Mike O'Shea's style, so to speak, in terms of how he operates and everything like that, but it's to be determined.
So O'Shea is kind of a fly by the seat of his pants guy. Hey, it's like that beard. I'll shave it when I shave it. Okay, here's a kind of going away from the CFL, but Canadian football. In 5 years, Taylor Elgersma will be where?
Ooh, boy, put me on the hot seat. Okay, let's work from today, what we know, and then we can try to workshop our way out to that, okay? First of all, Taylor Elgersma becomes the first Canadian university quarterback to play in the Senior Bowl through an absolute dime that you can see on the live stream there. 43-yard go route to Pat Bryant in the Senior Bowl. Shows off the arm strength in a week where he's just getting to know these guys. Like, he might not even know some of these dudes' names, even though I think he's a great leader and he wants to get to know them. But he looked like he belonged based on the scouts I talked to on the ground. Did he have some struggles during the practice week? Yes, but he's essentially playing American football, not for the first time, because there was a couple other bowl games, and he's been down at a place called QB Country that trains the likes of Drake May and Bo Nix. By the way, training last offseason in preparation for this. But it's his first time being on that stage with legit NFL coaches. Like, his head coach, Mike Kafka, is the offensive coordinator for the New York Giants. Like, if Kafka doesn't know what bad quarterbacking looks like at this point, then I don't know, what he's looking at, right? Like, look at the New York Giants quarterback situation for a second. So Taylor Elgersma, to me, has a lot of upside here, and it's only going to take one team to fall in love with him. And next great step for him, and different people will tell you different things, would be to get an invite to the NFL Combine, just to be on that stage. But not so much with the cameras in your face. It would be about the interviews, Barney. That's going to be really key for him, is how much knowledge can he show and how fast can he pick up the American game and translate it to impressing the teams in the interviews. I think he can do it. He's a kid that learns quickly. But, I had my former University of Guelph teammate, Rob Maver, tell me the other day when we were talking about Taylor Elgersma, he's like, when I was with the Atlanta Falcons and he was with them for a little while, he was being joked as, I forget the name that they called him. It was something about Canada. And they were asking him if he could call out the protection. And he said his mind was just going a mile a minute, and it would have took him some time to pick it up. That's just special teams, okay? That's just a punter. Like, I'm not hating on punters. Hashtag punters are people too. But when he's telling you your head is spinning about special teams, can you imagine what Taylor Elgersma is being put through right now in terms of mental gymnastics? So to try to answer your question, in 5 years, I think I'll hit the pause button because we'll have a better idea what happens around the NFL draft. If he gets signed, most importantly, I know I'm pushing it down the road, by a team that believes that he has the upside, which I think he does. Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl executive director, who was a scout in the NFL for 18 years, told me no concerns about his arm. He's got arm talent that's right there with a bunch of NFL quarterbacks, and especially the ones in this draft. So depending on the place that he goes, I think there's a chance that he could be in a training camp and could be developed. 5 years is just so hard to say. I guess the smart money would be on him being in the CFL, but here's the other part of this, Barney, and I know it's a bit of a rant that's going to come here. I don't understand how Taylor Elgersma wins the Heck Crichton Trophy, goes to the Senior Bowl. Like, Jim Nagy's an 18-year NFL scouting veteran, sees a little bit about the kid, hears about him. All of a sudden, he invites him to the Senior Bowl, the most prestigious all-star event in the NFL draft process. I see him just a little bit of film. Yet Taylor Elgersma is not on the CFL Scouting Bureau's top 20 list in the fall. Like, how's that possible? Why do we need NFL scouts to rubber stamp this kid before, and I'm not saying everybody, but some people in the Canadian Football League take him seriously? This guy has elite arm talent. He can spin it just as good, if not better, dare I say, than the majority of the quarterbacks that are going to come up to the Canadian Football League and get a chance as rookies in 2025.
That's a really good point. Glenn Suter would love to pile on that point because he waves the flag so hard. Okay, The question, and I can't remember who I asked this to, it might have been Arash Madani last week. Why is Elgersma playing in Canada? Why wasn't he playing NCAA? Is there a reason for that?
Well, his last year of high school was wiped out because of COVID, and he still got after it. But this is a guy that was cut from tryouts at Team Ontario, like his own provincial team. And Michael Faulds, the head coach at Wilfrid Laurier University, spotted him, and he liked him because he was trying to get as many reps as he could. He was trying to get in the front of the line at one of their high school camps. So this is a guy that wasn't highly recruited. And Michael Faulds saw something in and developed. So that's the reason that he didn't go stateside. Perhaps he could have gone to the U.S. after, let's say, he won the OUA MVP in 2023, because we've seen some of those situations, like Dean Leonard, University of Calgary for a couple of years, goes to Ole Miss, gets drafted by the Chargers, has been there for a while. Same thing, Tavius Robinson at Guelph for 2 years. COVID happened, goes to Ole Miss. He's with the Baltimore Ravens now, regular on their defensive line rotation. So that could have been a possibility. It certainly would have helped him. But the fact that he's got noticed by the Senior Bowl and NFL teams right now has created this buzz that could lead to an NFL chance.
Okay, that answers my question. I'm glad you answered that, because I've been wondering. I'm like, so a little bit of maybe a late bloomer, but a hard worker to get to where he is, and now, hey, he's in it. I think he's in a good spot. Took up more time than I said we would today, so thanks for not exiting the link. Wealth of knowledge as per usual, JD. Always appreciate it. Thanks for giving Rider Nation and the Sports Cage some solid info today.
Thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it. Go get warm with that Western pizza, huh?
Send me a jacket. It's freezing. There's our guy, pregame, postgame show on Rider Radio, Justin Dunk from 3DownNation, joining us.